In the shadowed corridors of the Palazzo Medici, where power shifted like morning mist and alliances crumbled faster than autumn leaves, there lived a truth that would echo through centuries. Intelligence is not singular, but manifold, and those who understand its layers hold dominion over both themselves and others. This principle, carved from the marble of human experience and polished by the blood of countless struggles, reveals itself in 7 distinct levels of cognitive mastery, each building upon the last like the rings of an ancient fortress. The first revelation comes not from books or scholars, but from observing the raw mechanics of survival itself. In the lowest tier dwells what we call instinctual intelligence, the primitive awareness that governs fight, flight, and the basic preservation of life. This intelligence operates without thought, like a sword drawn in darkness before the mind registers danger. Every human possesses it, yet few recognize its profound significance in the architecture of power. Watch a man cornered in an alley by 3 assailants. His body moves before his mind calculates odds. His muscles tense, his vision narrows, his breathing changes. This is not cowardice or bravery, this is the first intelligence speaking, the one that kept our ancestors alive when fangs and claws ruled the world. In the courts of power, this intelligence manifests as the ability to sense treachery before it crystallizes into action, to feel the shift in a room's atmosphere when loyalty begins to waver. Those who dismiss this primal awareness as mere animal instinct commit a fatal error. The shrewd observer learns to cultivate and refine these responses, transforming raw survival instinct into sophisticated political intuition. The man who feels unease in the presence of certain counselors, who senses danger in too smooth words and excessive flattery, who trusts his gut when documents appear too convenient, this man has begun the journey toward true strategic intelligence. Yet instinct alone creates beasts, not leaders. The second tier emerges when raw awareness meets structured thought, analytical intelligence. Here lies the realm of logic, pattern recognition, and systematic thinking. This intelligence dissects problems like a physician examining a corpse, laying bare each component to understand the whole. In the hands of the skilled, it becomes a scalpel that cuts through deception and reveals the bones of truth beneath layers of elaborate lies. Consider the merchant who can calculate profit margins while simultaneously assessing the political stability of trade routes, or the general who studies not merely troop movements but the economic pressures that drive enemy decisions. This intelligence creates the chess masters of human affairs, those who see 3 moves ahead while others struggle to comprehend the current position. But analysis without action remains academic exercise. The scholars who fill their minds with endless facts yet never apply them to real consequence demonstrate the limitation of pure analytical intelligence. They become living libraries, valuable for consultation perhaps, but never the architects of their own destiny. True strategic intelligence requires the marriage of analysis with implementation. The third tier represents this union: creative intelligence. This faculty generates novel solutions, finds unexpected paths through seemingly impossible obstacles, and transforms constraints into advantages. Where analytical intelligence follows established patterns, creative intelligence shatters them and forges new ones. It is the difference between playing by existing rules and rewriting the rules themselves. History remembers those who possessed this creative fire. They turned weaknesses into weapons, disadvantages into strategic positions, and apparent defeats into ultimate victories. When conventional warfare failed, they invented new forms of conflict. When traditional alliances crumbled, they created unprecedented partnerships. When old systems of power became obsolete, they designed new ones that served their purposes. Creative intelligence often appears as intuitive leaps that confound purely analytical minds. The stroke of genius that seems to emerge from nowhere actually represents the synthesis of countless observations and experiences, combined in ways that logic alone could never achieve. Yet creativity without discipline becomes mere chaos. And this brings us to the fourth tier, emotional intelligence. This represents perhaps the most misunderstood form of strategic awareness. Not the sentimental manipulation that weak minds imagine, but the precise understanding and orchestration of human motivation. Emotional intelligence reads the hidden currents that move men's hearts, the fears that drive their choices, the desires that bind them to causes greater than themselves. The master of emotional intelligence understands that every human interaction operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Surface words carry obvious meanings, but tone, timing, and context reveal deeper truths. A slight hesitation before answering, a particular choice of phrase, the way someone's attention shifts during conversation, These subtleties speak volumes to those trained to interpret them. More importantly, emotional intelligence provides the keys to influence. Men may be convinced by logic, but they are moved by emotion. The leader who can inspire genuine loyalty, who can make others willingly sacrifice for shared vision, who can transform individual ambitions into collective purpose. This leader wields power far beyond what force or mere cleverness could achieve. But emotional mastery extends beyond influencing others to controlling oneself. The man who cannot govern his own passions becomes their slave, no matter how brilliant his analytical capabilities or creative insights. Emotional intelligence includes the discipline to suppress immediate desires for long-term advantage, to maintain composure under extreme pressure, and to choose responses based on strategic value rather than emotional impulse. The fifth tier transcends individual brilliance entirely: social intelligence. This represents the ability to understand and navigate complex social systems, to read the invisible networks of influence that truly govern human affairs. Social intelligence sees beyond individual relationships to perceive the larger patterns of alliance, obligation, and mutual dependence that shape events. Every human organization, from the smallest family to the mightiest empire, operates according to unwritten rules that often contradict its official structures. Social intelligence maps these hidden hierarchies, identifies the real decision-makers behind ceremonial figureheads, and understands how information and influence actually flow through social networks. The socially intelligent leader knows when to approach problems through direct confrontation and when to work through intermediaries. They understand which battles can be won through public argument and which require private negotiation. They recognize that sometimes the person with the grandest title holds less real power than someone whose name never appears in official records. Social intelligence also encompasses the ability to build and maintain the relationships that create lasting influence. This goes far beyond mere networking or superficial charm. It requires genuine understanding of what motivates different types of people, the patience to invest in relationships that may not yield immediate benefits, and the wisdom to know when loyalty should be given, when it should be withheld, and when it must be withdrawn. The sixth tier elevates strategic thinking to its highest practical form: strategic intelligence. This represents the ability to conceive and execute long-term plans that account for the complex interplay of multiple variables across extended time horizons. Strategic intelligence thinks in years and decades, not days and weeks. It builds foundations for future advantage while managing immediate necessities. Strategic intelligence requires the integration of all lower levels of intelligence. It uses instinctual awareness to sense opportunities and threats, analytical intelligence to understand their implications, creative intelligence to devise novel approaches, emotional intelligence to motivate implementation, and social intelligence to navigate the human networks required for success. The strategically intelligent individual thinks like a gardener rather than a hunter. Where the hunter seeks immediate prey, the gardener plants seeds that will bear fruit in future seasons. They invest in capabilities that may seem unnecessary today, but will prove invaluable tomorrow. They build relationships that appear to serve no immediate purpose, but create options for future action. Strategic intelligence also encompasses the ability to think systematically about cause and effect across multiple domains. The truly strategic mind understands that changes in one area inevitably create ripple effects in others. Economic policies affect social stability, which influences political alliances, which determine military capabilities, which shape international relationships, which circle back to impact economic conditions. Yet even supreme strategic intelligence remains bounded by the limitations of any single perspective, no matter how brilliant. This recognition leads to the seventh and highest tier: transcendent intelligence. This represents the rare ability to step outside one's own mental frameworks entirely, to see patterns and possibilities that exist beyond the constraints of any particular worldview or cultural conditioning. Transcendent intelligence achieves what the philosophers call metacognition, thinking about thinking itself. It recognizes that all mental models are approximations of reality, useful but inherently limited. This intelligence can adopt multiple perspectives simultaneously, understanding how the same situation appears completely different from various vantage points. Those who achieve transcendent intelligence often appear to possess almost supernatural insight because they can perceive connections and possibilities that remain invisible to others, trapped within narrower frameworks. They see the forest, the trees, and the entire ecosystem that surrounds both. They understand not just what is happening, but why it appears to be happening. and how different interpretations of events lead to vastly different strategic responses. Transcendent intelligence also includes the profound recognition that ultimate power lies not in controlling external circumstances, which remain forever beyond complete control, but in mastering one's own responses to those circumstances. This brings us to the second great principle that governs all strategic thinking: the destruction of weakness within oneself. The weak self is not simply the frightened self or the ignorant self, though it includes both. The weak self is the collection of mental habits, emotional patterns, and unconscious assumptions that limit our ability to perceive clearly and act effectively. It is the part of us that clings to comfortable illusions rather than facing difficult truths, that chooses immediate gratification over long-term benefit, that allows wounded pride to override strategic judgment. Destroying the weak self requires more than mere self-discipline. Though discipline provides the foundation, it demands a systematic dismantling of the psychological structures that create vulnerability to external manipulation and internal sabotage. This process is neither comfortable nor quick, but it represents the only path to genuine invulnerability. The weak self reveals itself through patterns of thought and behavior that consistently produce suboptimal results. It speaks in the voice of "I can't," "I shouldn't," and "I must have." It creates emotional attachments to outcomes beyond our control while neglecting areas where we possess genuine influence. It builds identity around external validation rather than internal standards of excellence. Consider the leader who bases decisions on what will be popular rather than what will be effective. Their weak self craves approval more than achievement, and this craving becomes a weakness that enemies can exploit. They become predictable, always choosing the path of least social resistance. And predictability is the death of strategic advantage. Or observe the individual who cannot tolerate criticism, who interprets every challenge as a personal attack, who must defend every past decision regardless of new evidence. Their weak self has fused identity with ego, creating brittleness where strength requires flexibility. They become their own worst enemy, sabotaging future success to protect past choices that may have been wrong from the beginning. The process of destroying weakness begins with ruthless self-assessment. This requires the intellectual honesty to examine one's own motivations without the comforting filters of rationalization and self-justification. Why do I make the choices I make? What fears drive my decisions? Which of my beliefs serve me well, and which limit my effectiveness? What patterns of behavior consistently produce results I claim not to want? Such self-examination proves painful because it reveals the gap between our idealized self-image and our actual patterns of thought and behavior. The weak self resists this process fiercely, generating elaborate justifications for why such examination is unnecessary, dangerous, or impossibly difficult. It creates urgent distractions, emotional crises, and compelling reasons why serious self-improvement must be postponed. Breaking through these defense mechanisms requires what the ancient Stoics called the discipline of desire, the systematic training of our wants and needs to align with what is actually achievable and beneficial. This does not mean eliminating all desires, but rather ensuring that our desires serve our strategic objectives rather than undermining them. The man who craves luxury but cannot afford it without compromising his independence has allowed desire to become weakness. The leader who needs constant reassurance from subordinates has made emotional neediness a vulnerability that undermines authority. The strategist who cannot bear to be misunderstood has created a dependency on others' opinions that limits freedom of action. Destroying these dependencies requires both philosophical understanding and practical discipline. Philosophically, we must accept that external circumstances will always remain partially beyond our control, that other people's opinions of us matter far less than our actual capabilities and achievements, and that temporary discomfort is a reasonable price for long-term strength. Practically, we must undertake exercises that systematically reduce our psychological dependencies. This might mean deliberately choosing discomfort when comfortable options are available, practicing unpopular decisions when popular ones would be easier, or accepting criticism without defensive responses even when the criticism seems unfair. The weak self also manifests through cognitive biases that distort our perception of reality. We see what we want to see, remember what confirms our existing beliefs, and interpret ambiguous information in ways that protect our self-image. These mental habits served our ancestors well in simpler environments, but they become dangerous liabilities in complex strategic situations. Confirmation bias leads us to seek information that supports our current position, while avoiding data that might require changing course. Availability bias causes us to overestimate the probability of vivid events we can easily remember, while underestimating more common but less memorable risks. Anchoring bias makes us rely too heavily on the first piece of information we encounter about a situation. These biases operate automatically and unconsciously, which means that simply knowing about them provides insufficient protection. Destroying their influence requires the development of systematic thinking habits that counteract natural mental tendencies. This includes actively seeking disconfirming evidence, deliberately considering alternative interpretations of events, and creating decision-making processes that force us to examine our assumptions. The weak self further reveals itself through emotional patterns that consistently interfere with clear judgment. Anger clouds strategic thinking by focusing attention on immediate responses rather than long-term consequences. Fear creates paralysis or causes us to see threats where opportunities exist. Hope can blind us to obvious dangers by making us believe that good intentions guarantee good outcomes. Mastering these emotional patterns does not require becoming emotionless. Emotions provide valuable information about our environment and our values. Rather, it requires developing the ability to feel emotions fully while choosing responses based on strategic rather than emotional criteria. The anger may be justified, but is expressing it now, in this way, toward this person, likely to advance our larger objectives. This emotional discipline proves particularly challenging because our culture often treats emotional expression as authenticity and emotional control as artificiality or suppression. But strategic intelligence recognizes the difference between suppression pushing emotions down where they continue to influence behavior unconsciously, and mastery acknowledging emotions while choosing responses that serve our broader purposes. The destruction of weakness also requires eliminating the victim mentality that sees external circumstances as the primary determinant of our success or failure. The weak self constantly searches for someone or something to blame for its problems: the economy, the government, other people's prejudices, past traumas, current circumstances, or simple bad luck. While external factors certainly influence our opportunities and challenges, the victim mentality focuses attention on what we cannot control while neglecting areas where we do possess genuine agency. It creates learned helplessness that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we believe we are powerless, we stop looking for ways to exercise power, which ensures that we remain powerless. Destroying victim mentality requires taking complete responsibility for our responses to circumstances, regardless of whether those circumstances seem fair or unfair. This does not mean accepting blame for everything that happens to us, but rather claiming complete ownership of our choices about how to respond to whatever happens. The person who loses their job due to economic conditions beyond their control can respond as a victim, blaming the economy, the government, their former employer, or their bad luck, or they can respond strategically by immediately beginning to develop new skills, network with potential employers, or create alternative income sources. The circumstances are the same, but the responses lead to entirely different outcomes. This principle extends to how we interpret our own past experiences. The weak self dwells on past injustices, mistakes, and missed opportunities, treating them as evidence that success is impossible or unfair. The strong self treats the same experiences as data about what works and what doesn't, as training that has prepared us for future challenges, as proof that we can survive difficulties and adapt to changing circumstances. Reframing past experience requires conscious effort because our brains naturally focus more attention on negative events than positive ones, another survival mechanism that served our ancestors well but limits our strategic effectiveness in modern contexts. Overcoming this negativity bias requires deliberately practicing gratitude for opportunities and advantages we do possess, while mining difficult experiences for lessons that can inform future decisions. The destruction of weakness culminates in the development of what we might call strategic indifference, the ability to remain emotionally detached from outcomes while remaining fully committed to excellent performance. This paradoxical combination represents one of the highest achievements of human development, and one of the most difficult to understand or explain. Strategic indifference does not mean not caring about results, quite the opposite. It means caring so deeply about long-term success that we refuse to allow attachment to any particular short-term outcome to interfere with optimal decision-making. It means wanting something so much that we are willing to let go of our attachment to having it, because that attachment itself might prevent us from achieving it. The leader who desperately needs a particular negotiation to succeed brings desperation to the table, and desperation is always a negotiating weakness. The entrepreneur who cannot bear the thought of failure makes fear-based decisions that increase the probability of failure. The artist who must have critical approval creates work designed to please critics rather than express authentic vision. Strategic indifference liberates us from these self-imposed constraints by reducing the emotional charge attached to specific outcomes. We can pursue our objectives with full intensity while remaining internally flexible about exactly how those objectives might be achieved. We can take calculated risks without being paralyzed by the possibility of failure. And we can accept success without becoming attached to the particular form it takes. This internal freedom translates directly into external power because it eliminates the predictable weaknesses that others can exploit. The opponent who knows exactly what we desperately want or desperately fear can use that knowledge to manipulate our choices. The person who has destroyed their weak self presents no such obvious pressure points. Strategic indifference also enables what might be called strategic patience, the ability to wait for optimal opportunities rather than forcing suboptimal ones. The weak self operates from scarcity mentality, believing that current opportunities are the only ones available, that immediate action is always better than delayed action, that half a loaf is always better than no loaf. The strong self recognizes abundance, not the naive abundance that believes everything will work out automatically, but the strategic abundance that understands how to create opportunities through patient positioning and systematic preparation. This mindset can wait for the right moment to act because it trusts in its ability to recognize and capitalize on that moment when it arrives. Patience proves particularly challenging in cultures that celebrate immediate results and rapid advancement. The pressure to show constant progress can seduce us into taking actions that provide short-term visible benefits at the cost of long-term strategic position. The truly strategic mind resists this pressure by maintaining focus on ultimate objectives rather than intermediate metrics. The destruction of weakness requires one final element that integrates all others: the cultivation of genuine self-respect based on internal standards rather than external validation. The weak self constantly seeks approval, recognition, and reassurance from others, making it dependent on opinions and evaluations it cannot control. This dependency creates multiple vulnerabilities. It makes us predictable to those who understand our need for approval. It forces us to waste energy managing our image rather than improving our capabilities. It creates anxiety about criticism that interferes with learning and adaptation. Most dangerously, it gives others the power to manipulate our behavior by threatening to withdraw their approval. Genuine self-respect, by contrast, derives from our own assessment of whether we are living up to our own standards of excellence. It asks not, "What will others think?" but, "Is this consistent with who I choose to be?" It creates internal stability that cannot be shaken by external criticism or praise. Building this internal foundation requires first establishing clear personal principles, not abstract moral platitudes, but specific behavioral standards that define how we will act in various situations. These principles must be chosen consciously rather than inherited unconsciously, and they must be practical rather than idealistic. For example, one might establish the principle, "I will not make promises I cannot keep, even when keeping promises proves inconvenient or costly." This principle creates a standard against which specific choices can be measured. Following it builds self-respect through demonstrated integrity, while violating it erodes the internal foundation of strength. Such principles must be tested under pressure to develop real strength. It is easy to maintain integrity when integrity costs nothing. True self-respect develops through choosing principle over convenience when convenience would be easier, choosing honesty over flattery when flattery would be profitable, choosing long-term benefit over short-term pleasure when pleasure beckons seductively. The man who has destroyed his weak self through this systematic process of internal development becomes truly unconquerable because he has eliminated the internal vulnerabilities that others might exploit. He cannot be manipulated through fear because he has faced his fears and developed appropriate responses to them. He cannot be controlled through greed because he has separated his identity from his possessions. He cannot be compromised through vanity because he has grounded his self-worth in his own standards rather than others' opinions. This invulnerability does not make such a person cold or inhuman. Quite the opposite. By eliminating the internal noise of weakness, fear, and dependency, he becomes more capable of genuine connection with others, more able to offer authentic help and leadership. more trustworthy in his commitments and relationships. The integration of all 7 levels of intelligence with the destruction of internal weakness creates what we might call the complete strategic mind, a consciousness capable of operating effectively across all domains of human experience while remaining internally free from the limitations that constrain most human potential. Such minds appear rarely in history, but when they do appear, they tend to shape events far beyond what their formal positions or material resources would suggest. They possess the internal freedom that enables external effectiveness, the self-mastery that creates the capacity for leadership, the strategic patience that can outlast opponents driven by immediate needs and fears. They understand that true power comes not from controlling others, which remains forever uncertain and temporary, but from controlling themselves, which provides the foundation for all other forms of influence and achievement. They recognize that the battle for strategic advantage begins in the mind and heart, and that victory in external conflicts depends on victory in internal ones. The path toward developing these capabilities remains open to anyone willing to undertake the difficult work of systematic self-development. It requires neither special talents nor extraordinary circumstances, but rather the patience to build strength incrementally, the honesty to face uncomfortable truths about oneself, and the discipline to choose strategic value over immediate gratification repeatedly over time. The rewards of this development extend far beyond mere personal success or material achievement. They include the profound satisfaction of living according to one's own standards, the security that comes from self-reliance, the freedom that derives from independence, and the peace that emerges when internal conflicts have been resolved in favor of coherent purpose. Most importantly, they include the capacity to serve purposes greater than oneself without losing oneself in the service, to contribute to the welfare of others without sacrificing one's own integrity, to exercise leadership without becoming corrupted by power, and to face whatever challenges life presents with confidence in one's ability to respond effectively. This represents the ultimate strategic advantage, not the ability to predict or control external events, which remains forever limited, but the ability to respond to any external events from a position of internal strength, clarity, and purpose. It is the advantage that cannot be taken away by economic downturns, political upheavals, or personal tragedies because it resides not in circumstances but in character. The ancient wisdom that inspired this exploration continues to echo through the centuries because it addresses the permanent features of human nature rather than the temporary conditions of any particular era. The 7 levels of intelligence operate in boardrooms and battlefields, in families and nations, in times of peace and periods of crisis. The necessity of destroying internal weakness to achieve external strength applies equally to the merchant and the monarch, the artist and the general, the student and the teacher. Understanding these principles provides the foundation for strategic thinking, but applying them requires the sustained effort that transforms understanding into capability. Knowledge without application remains academic. Application without persistence produces only temporary results. Persistence without wisdom leads to impressive failure rather than meaningful success. The complete strategic mind combines all elements: understanding with application, persistence with wisdom, internal development with external effectiveness, individual strength with service to larger purposes. It represents not the end of development, but rather the beginning of true effectiveness, the foundation upon which meaningful achievement becomes possible. In a world of increasing complexity and accelerating change, these timeless principles provide stable ground for building adaptive capability. They offer not formulas for guaranteed success, which do not exist, but rather frameworks for thinking clearly about success, methods for developing the capacities that make success more likely, and the internal resources necessary to weather inevitable setbacks and failures along the way. The journey towards strategic mastery remains as challenging today as it was in the Renaissance courts where these insights first crystallized, but it also remains as rewarding for those who undertake it with sufficient seriousness and commitment. It offers the possibility of living with purpose, rather than merely reacting to circumstances, of creating value rather than simply consuming it, of exercising influence rather than merely being influenced. Most fundamentally, it offers the prospect of becoming truly oneself, not the collection of unconscious habits, inherited beliefs, and reactive patterns that most people mistake for identity, but the conscious, purposeful, strategic intelligence capable of shaping its own development and contributing meaningfully to the development of others. This represents perhaps the highest achievement possible for human consciousness and the most practical foundation for any form of lasting success or satisfaction. The 7 levels of intelligence provide the cognitive architecture for this achievement, while the destruction of weakness clears away the internal obstacles that prevent its realization. Together, they offer a comprehensive approach to human development that serves both individual fulfillment and collective progress, both personal power and shared prosperity, both immediate effectiveness and long-term wisdom. This synthesis of strategic intelligence and internal mastery creates the possibility of what we might call enlightened effectiveness, the ability to achieve practical success while maintaining ethical integrity, to exercise power while serving worthy purposes, to compete vigorously while cooperating generously, to pursue individual excellence while contributing to collective welfare. Such integration represents neither compromise nor contradiction, but rather the mature resolution of tensions that appear irreconcilable only from less developed perspectives. It demonstrates that the highest levels of strategic thinking transcend zero-sum competition to create positive-sum opportunities, that genuine strength includes rather than excludes compassion, that true wisdom combines rather than separates practical effectiveness and ethical behavior. The man who destroys his weak self and develops all 7 levels of strategic intelligence does indeed become unconquerable, not because he wins every battle, which remains impossible, but because he cannot be fundamentally defeated by any external force. His victories and defeats alike serve his larger development. His successes and failures both contribute to his growing wisdom. His achievements and setbacks equally strengthen his capacity for future effectiveness. This unconquerability emerges not from invulnerability to harm, which would require becoming less than human, but from the ability to transform any experience into increased capability, any challenge into an opportunity for development, any obstacle into training for greater strength. It represents the achievement of strategic immortality, the creation of value and capacity that transcends individual circumstances and contributes to the ongoing evolution of human potential itself.